Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Honest. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. The oil shortages have begun from Europe to Asia, including China. Happily, in America, we drilled, baby, drilled, so it's our war, but it ain't our shortage. Just 3 weeks into the Iran war, the world is already running out of gas. This hits energy prices in America, but it's hitting energy shortages everywhere else. So American oil prices, West Texas Intermediate, are bumping around $100. That's up 30 since the war, good for 75 cents at the pump. Meanwhile, Europe, Brent, is over 110, while Asia's price, Dubai benchmark, just touched $170 a barrel. Natural gas, which heats homes and runs factories, is even worse. U.S. prices, Henry Hub, are up around 7%, but Europe and Japan are now roughly doubled, so they're between 6 and 7 times higher than the U.S. The reason, of course, is we drilled, baby, drilled. Compared to the 1970s oil crisis, we have doubled production of petroleum products, so crude, liquids, natural gas, to the point we are the biggest exporter in the world of both oil and natural gas. It's a very different story in Europe and Asia, where Europe's net zero climate ferry shuttered gigawatts of coal and nuclear, to the point Europe imports 80% of its petroleum products and almost all of its natural gas. Asia is even worse, not because of the climate ferries, but because Asia has almost no oil. They got a losing hand in geography. China covers just a quarter of its oil use, while Japan, Korea, India, and Thailand import nearly 100% of their energy. The problem is oil and gas are not like buying sneakers or cars. You cannot just keep using your old sneakers. You have to cut cooking, heating, driving to work, running the factory, so rural Chinese can buy food. Now, when the war first kicked off, I predicted Asia would see widespread shortages as early as a month. Actually went faster than I thought, so China kicked off with miles-long lines of cars trying to get gas before price hikes, followed by a nationwide ban on energy exports. Korea and a raft of Eastern Europeans have imposed price caps on gasoline, with Japan considering it. Bangladesh and Sri Lanka are imposing rationing, so only essential use gets gas. Myanmar mandated every other day driving, so even-number license plates can only drive on even-number days. Philippines and Pakistan imposed 4-day work weeks. Pakistan also shut universities, partly to save gas, partly because Pakistani students riot whenever energy gets expensive. Bangladesh created a new holiday to close universities early. Thailand banned air conditioning under 79 degrees. That's 26 if you cling to Celsius. India banned natural gas for cremations. You gotta buy firewood. The big one is still coming: mandatory idling of factories that could lay off tens of millions across Asia. So a sex crisis isn't the war, it's oil and gas, both prices and shortages. Trump knows this, which is why he is hell-bent on reopening the Hormuz. But until the guns fall silent, we'll get inflation and slowdowns in America, but the rest of the world is facing catastrophe. Home sales just crashed a fifth in a single month. That's the worst since housing was crawling out of the 2008 financial crisis. Some regions were even worse. Sales in the Midwest fell 34%. The Northeast was down 45% in a single month. Last one to sell, turn out the lights. The drop took home sales to just 587,000, which is just half what they were during the pandemic, as 150,000 lower than 2019, when there were 20 million fewer people in the country. Oddly, homes trying to sell are up an impressive 4.9% year on year, while prices are now down 7% on the year. So there's more homes for sale, they're cheaper, but nobody's buying. So what's the problem? Easy mortgage rates. They are too high for buyers, while sellers are locked in too cheap COVID-era mortgages. So when COVID hit, the Federal Reserve printed almost $7 trillion, which is about $1 in $3 in existence before COVID. They did this to buy lockdowns. Low-income voters could make more sitting on the couch watching videos of dancing nurses than going to work. 5 of that 7 was so-called quantitative easing, where the Fed types zeros on an Excel sheet in the basement, declares its money, and buys everything in sight. The other $2 trillion of counterfeiting, or monetary expansion, was farmed to Wall Street by offering them money at just 0.25% interest. Basically free money when inflation was turning a massive profit for them. That pulled down mortgage rates, which at one point in 2020 were just 2.6%, and they stayed under 3% for over a year. So that was a heck of a gift to anybody with the credit and down payment to buy or refinance, because if mortgages are 2.6 when inflation's driving home prices 15% a year, you are literally getting paid to borrow. So anybody who bought the median house and put 10% down made a profit of nearly $110,000 thanks to COVID and the Fed. The problem is house prices are now flat to down. They're down 7% across the nation. So there goes the free money. Meanwhile, mortgage rates have now doubled to 6.4. That means the half of mortgages initiated during COVID under 3% would double their payment if they moved and bought an identical house. They'd go from $1,300 a month to $2,500 a month, and most Americans do not have $1,200 a month lying around. So they're stuck. They may want to sell, but they can't afford to sell. So is the solution either house prices have to come down a lot, like a third, which would devastate older Americans who hold $19 trillion of home equity, which is about a quarter of their retirement, or else mortgage rates have to come down a lot. So this is why Trump's been pounding the table to get too late Jerome Powell to cut rates. Unfortunately, he's now up against a war that is pushing up mortgage rates through inflation. So in 3 weeks, mortgages are already up a half point on the war, and they will keep rising if the war keeps going, making housing worse. So as experts, both Trump and Congress are trying to fix housing. Trump's focused on building more homes, so getting rid of regulations, restrictive zoning, rent control, and chasing institutional buyers out of the market, while Congress, of course, is focused on giving money to low-income buyers. Now, both weak at the margin, but both are up against the Fed's mortgage hole that is now getting worse. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. Now back to our show. The Wall Street banking cartel is facing its biggest technology threat since the 1970s. It's trying to bribe Congress to ban it. While voters are distracted by burning oil fields, Wall Street lobbyists are burning up the steak dinners and donor checks to block an existential threat to the fractional reserve Ponzi from a once obscure corner of crypto called stablecoins. So House and Senate Republicans are currently in a dogfight over a housing bill that, in theory, would make housing cheaper by either dumping government money into it, the Senate, or in the House letting regional banks pyramid even more loans on the 10 cents on the dollar they have in the vault. Those 10 cents in the vault is known as fractional reserve banking. Critics call it fictional reserve banking, which is the legal privilege where banks can print and lend money they do not actually have. It's called counterfeiting when you try it at home. So handouts versus counterfeiting, your Congress at work. Senators are now trying to break the logjam by offering a $1 trillion gift to banks in the form of a ban on stablecoin interest. So a stablecoin is a type of cryptocurrency, but instead of bouncing around like Bitcoin, its one token is always worth $1. This means you can use it like a dollar, but it's much cheaper since you cut out the middleman. So think Visa or Cash App or a checking account with zero fees. More important, stablecoins have to be backed 1-for-1 with cash or treasuries. Unlike banks, who thanks to fractional reserve only back 7 to 10 cents on the dollar. That's where it gets interesting, because those treasuries in the vault pay interest, currently over 4%. And because stablecoins cost almost nothing to run, they can pass 94% of that on to users. This effectively makes stablecoins a bank account that's fully backed, zero fee, and pays 4% interest. In contrast to Wall Street, which is 1/10 backed, collects nearly $100 billion in fees, and pays less than 1/10 0.1% interest. So 40 times less interest, the rest is for their mistress in the Hamptons. Spot the problem, nobody would use a bank account, and that is when you call Congress. Now, in theory, bankers already banned interest on stablecoins in last year's Genius Act, but in reality, stablecoins found ways to keep paying interest. They call them rewards, loyalty bonus, distributions. Coinbase, for example, pays 3 to 4% interest on stablecoins as a rewards program. So with House and Senate Republicans fighting, Wall Street saw its chance to swoop in and finish off competition that, God forbid, would deliver Americans zero-fee bank accounts that pay 4% interest and, being fully backed, do not need $2 trillion bailouts. So as next, Wall Street may bribe enough senators to win this battle, but they are losing the war because multiple techs are trying to deliver full reserve banking. Beyond stablecoins, there's tokenized money market funds, corporate currencies, think Tesla dollars or Amazon dollars, literal full reserve banks like Custodian Wyoming, and of course, Bitcoin. The Wall Street Ponzi has to get lucky every single time. Techs that break fractional reserve only have to win once. And when they do win, it's the end of the boom-bust cycle of inflation and recession, bankrolled by fictional reserve banking. Republicans in Congress are pushing a central bank digital currency once again disguised as a ban so they can surveil and control every dollar you spend. Will it be the Republicans who make you eat the bugs? Republicans in Congress are currently pushing a housing bill that does some useful things to red tape zoning and mortgage rates, while doing some shady things. This is Congress, remember? Like letting banks print money they don't have and handing free money to people with bad credit, which didn't work in 2008. But hidden deep in the bowels is a little gem that effectively greenlights a central bank digital currency, CBDC, so long as Wall Street gets a piece of the action. So a CBDC is a kind of government-run crypto token that would replace the dollar with a centralized database that lets bureaucrats see and report every dollar you spend and lets them block anything they don't like. It's a stablecoin, but a government stablecoin. Now, this already happens in the banking system. Banks send the government transaction reports anytime you move 10 grand, and so-called suspicious activity reports if you do anything weird, both in blatant violation of the Fourth Amendment, requiring probable cause for government spying. Meanwhile, banks can and do control your money. Remember the Canadian trucker protests that forced banks to freeze protesters' accounts using powers we also have thanks to the Patriot Act. The difference is a CBDC does this to all of your dollars, not just your bank account. There is no escape unless you're paying the mortgage and groceries in gold or perhaps Bitcoin. China naturally is the world leader in CBDCs. It's bragged about the fact it can freeze any spending. It even allows negative interest rates where your money literally loses 8% a month unless you spend it, which is handy to force more spending in time for the next election. Aside from China, another 71 countries are building CBDCs or running pilots. Now, the Federal Reserve was running a pilot, but Trump ended that with an executive order as soon as he took office. Enter the housing bill, which already turned into a vehicle to cripple private stablecoins. I talked about that yesterday. But it also adds a CBDC ban that actually promotes a CBDC. The reason is there's two kinds of CBDCs. A retail CBDC, where the Fed issues tokens to the public, meaning you replace your bank with a bank account at the Fed, and a wholesale CBDC where the Fed issues tokens only to banks. The housing bill only bans the retail CBDC. It allows wholesale. This is a problem because retail terrifies Wall Street because millions of people would pull out their money and park it at the Fed because there's zero risk at the Fed. It cannot go bust. It is a giant counterfeiting machine. Wholesale, on the other hand, deals banks in. They can keep fleecing you just with a new backdoor for the bureaucrats. That flips the enormous Wall Street lobbying machine from anti-CBDC to pro-CBDC. Now, wholesale promoters promise it will never, ever be used for surveillance, but once it's built, they can flick a switch using any excuse, and going by the Patriot Act, they will be very creative about the excuses. So as 80% of the American public opposes a CBDC. Once they understand it, it's closer to 95%. That's across party, Republicans, Democrats, everything in between. But given the dollars and control at stake, Democrats and Republicans will keep trying to sneak in the back door no matter what voters think. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. Cracks are spreading in the $1.8 trillion private credit industry, like 2008, but this time gutting the load-bearing walls. On Tuesday, the Financial Times reported Ares Management, which runs $623 billion, limited redemptions in one of their flagship funds. That's the asset management equivalent of a bank run, so investors cannot pull their money because it would spark a fire sale that could collapse the entire fund. For scale, $623 billion would make Ares the 9th largest bank in America, just ahead of Capital One. Ares joins a rogues gallery of funds that have locked redemptions, starting with Blue Owl last month, which had been managing just over $300 billion more than American Express before it did start the fire sales. During the Blue Owl drama, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon warned, when you see one cockroach, there's more, and they're now coming every couple days. We've seen locks in Blackstone, Apollo, Cliffwater. Just last week, Morgan Stanley capped redemptions at a major private income fund. What's driving it is what drives every bank panic: bailouts that encourage risk. Namely, since the 1990s, finance assumes it will get a bailout from the Fed if things go bad. Now, the iron law of finance says more risk is more profit. You can charge more on a risky loan. So bankers do what bailouts pay them to do: get rich or die trying. On the ground, that meant hundreds of billions in loans to dodgy borrowers with sweetheart terms that let the borrower roll over the loan if they can't pay, so-called covenant-light deals. So borrow $100 million at 10%, and when you can't pay the $10 million interest, they just call it a $110 loan and pretend everything is fine. Known in the business as extend and pretend. That hides the fact that borrowers are in default, because a loan in default might be worth 30 cents on the dollar, it might be worth 5 cents. Like Enron, but an assembly line. Meanwhile, the Fed, as always, fed the fire with interest rates. You'll recall back in 2023, a clutch of banks went under because their bonds were worth less after the Fed hiked rates for Bidenflation. Rate hikes lower bond prices, which left trillion-dollar holes in bank balance sheets. Well, that happened on steroids to private credit, much of which went to commercial real estate that got double hit from work from home, and blue city mismanagement that crushed office prices with vacancy rates hitting 40-year highs. 1 in 5 offices now sits empty. Even more money went to dodgy corporate borrowers to fund leveraged buyouts that are now swimming in debt, like First Brands that went out last month with $12 billion in default. Sierra Simmons, Citrix, and Vision may have doubled that. With potentially a lot more, Barclays estimates half of the loans are to software and business services that are getting gutted as AI gives it away for free. Now, the problem is when the loans go bad, the investors get a haircut, some get wiped out. That matters because nearly half of the money was invested by pensions and insurance companies. If they cannot pay pensions or insurance claims, that has bailouts stamped on its head. So the Fed's permanent bailout and interest rate adventures created a monster in private credit. Nobody knows how many cockroaches there are, not surprising since they are hiding it. If the Ponzi does collapse, you will pay it off. As always, bankers eat their wins, you eat the losses. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersaintange.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.